Welcome to the Fantasy Clinic on talkSPORT End Zone. I'm Jay Lawrence, in for Will Gavin again today, joined by NFL Network's fantasy guru. Is that the best way of describing you, Mr. Adam Rank?
There's a lot of people who drafted Zamir White who would say anything but. It's one of those. It's so funny, Jay, because we sit there on the Fantasy Live show and we do like humble brags and all that stuff. And I always have to point out, like, I know that there's some person out there being like, hey, you also told me to pick Zamir White. So it's like, it's one of those things that you'll never be 100%.
I actually put it out there. I said, has anyone got any questions for Adam? And someone did say, why did he not choose the Broncos over the Bucks or something like that? And
I'm glad. I'm glad I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
Because anybody who follows me on Instagram or TikTok, we're still trying to find the Brit who has the Adam Rank handle. So it's Adam Rank NFL. On TikTok, I'm at Adam Rank. We formed a friendship last year, the Broncos fans and I, and because I believed, and I was really believing, and coming into the season, I really liked blown eggs, and I thought that the Broncos are going to be pretty good. I think they're okay right now, but so I actually went against the Broncos in week 3, and I put it on all the social media. I said, this is to help get the Broncos back over the top. This is why we're picking the Broncos. We're picking against the Broncos this week. They're going to beat the Bucks. And then I'll be back on board because they're going to beat the Jets in 2 weeks, which is exactly what happened. And I was on board with the Broncos last week over the Jets. So, and I'm picking the Broncos again this week against the Raiders. So let's go.
So you did him a favor. You did him a favor.
I did just for them.
Just for them. I'll pass that on. Let's talk fantasy. That's why we're here. And in fact, let's talk a whole team. Okay, a team that. Generally, people talk about them a lot because, they are reigning Super Bowl champions. But there is reason to talk about them specifically because they have been dogged by injuries, the Kansas City Chiefs, over the last few weeks. Anyway, the fantasy ray of light, I suppose, for this season has been Rashee Rice, somebody that could be considered a league winner, actually, or at least potentially a Super Bowl winner for the Kansas City Chiefs. They felt like they needed him. It felt like your fantasy team might need him, but it looks like he is going to be out for the season. How does that affect the Chiefs?
The news always keeps changing. Like, is he in Germany? Like, what is happening? For the Chiefs, though, I remember a couple of years ago when Tyreek Hill left, and I was convinced that by a former player who was like, oh, Tyreek Hill makes so many big plays for them. It's going to hurt them in the long run as a football team, which it hasn't because they've won 2 Super Bowls. And it's only hurt him. And where we thought he was going to be safe, or like Patrick Mahomes was going to be safe, was fantasy-wise. Because, like, hey, the fantasy numbers have still been great, even without Tyreek Hill. And then that's proven to not be the case. So actually, it was the reverse. So if I would have gone with my fantasy instinct, no. But I think that the Chiefs are still a very good football team. They still somehow find a way to win. They can start Jet McKinnon at running back, or any one of these guys, and they still find a way to win. So I think ultimately they'll be okay. For our fantasy teams, it's going to be a little bit more of a struggle because the only player I think that you could really count on at the moment is Travis Kelce. And even that's sort of dubious. Even in a matchup against a team that he normally dominates, he was fine. He was actually good for a tight end, but he wasn't the Travis Kelce that we expected. Now we have Xavier Worthy out there, who to me is kind of a pop play guy. Juju Smith-Schuster, I mean, this is where we're at. Like, I went through for every team where I missed out. Well, I'll be honest. I drafted Dontavian Wicks in a number of leagues, but I didn't have him in every league. But in every league where I missed out on Dontavian Wicks, I've now been scooping up Juju Smith-Schuster because that could end up being the guy. Because a couple of years ago, he had a real chemistry with Patrick Mahomes. And so when I look at that wide receiver room, unless they make a move, unless they bring back Tyreek Hill, unless they make a move for Devontae Adams, Juju Smith-Schuster might be the guy.
Is that just because he's just the next best guy on an offense with Patrick Mahomes, though?
A little bit. I mean, there is some of that. Like when he went to New England, like he wasn't going to be a guy that would go to New England and immediately make them better. But at the same time, who really does that? Like if you think about how Tyreek Hill has struggled over the last couple of weeks, I think it's proven that you can't just throw any quarterback out there and Tyreek Hill is going to be a stud. It's not like Justin Jefferson has kind of proven that. Oh, I think that's kind of damning to Sam Darnold, so I don't want to go that harsh. but in all honesty, Juju Smith-Schuster is not. Yeah, he's not somebody who's going to change. He's not going to elevate a quarterback.
But would you start Juju? Is there? Would you, for fantasy wise, are you saying to people consider picking him up?
I would definitely consider picking him up, especially in these bye weeks as we're moving forward. I have my rankings somewhere. I just sent these in. We have the flex rank. I'm gonna have to go through these again because like the news continues to shift, and we do, and you're trying to go through all that stuff. But yeah, like depending on where you have Juju, like for me, I look at him and like, am I starting him over Brandon Ayuk? I'm not. But at the same time, I'm still looking at him over a lot of wide receivers at the end of the barrel here. I mean, you're still talking about the number one wide receiver for the Kansas City Chiefs, which is still somewhat significant. Like that's still a pretty good player, even though they don't throw the ball a lot. Xavier Worthy's going to get in there, but for me, you got to know your roster because people, when they ask like that, it's like, what are you doing? Are you starting 3 wide receivers? If you're starting 3 wide receivers, Juju Smith's like a wide receiver 3. If you're starting and I'm stalling as I'm trying to get to these rankings, but if you have 2 wide receivers, if you start 2 wide receivers, odds are you're not starting Juju Smith-Schuster.
The other person I wanted to speak about, you can bring the rankings out when you find him, but the other person I want to speak about is, should we have any consideration for Kareem Hunt on that offense as well, fantasy-wise?
I did pick him up. I've added him in spots. I thought when everybody was picking up Carson Steele, there was a big move to like everybody was jumping in on Carson Steele, but at the same time, I'm like, well, Kareem Hunt was brought in with his familiarity of the offense, but you also have to remember Clyde Edwards-Helaire is eligible to return at some point as well. So this could be a real muddled backfield. So it depends on how many members of this Chiefs backfield do you really want to hold on to? Like if it's one of those things like you're trying to pick one, I think that it's, I would have Kareem Hunt as a slight lean over Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I definitely don't want to be carrying all 3 of them, but trying to get one of those 2 to be on your roster. We're definitely not starting him right now. And where I have Juju Smith-Schuster ranked right now, it's further down the list. I think that when you're looking at Juju, I have him behind guys like Tutu Atwell and Jordan Whittington, who played very well for the Rams over the last couple of weeks. Michael Wilson should be in consideration. Trey Tucker looked pretty good for the Raiders. And again, if Javonte Adams is not going to play. But you start getting into the situation where you have guys like Gabe Davis, Jalen Tolbert, Ashivas, Demario Douglas, Rashad Bateman. That's when you start seeing Juju starting to be prominent. And so if those are guys you're starting, then I could go with Juju over them.
But we're talking deep leagues, though, aren't we?
We're talking deeper leagues. So
yeah.
but I'm still adding them to my roster because right now, you don't know. I mean, a couple of seasons ago, Juju Smith was the most targeted guy in that offense. I'm going to have him just in case. Like, maybe he is the guy. Like, maybe, because there was a lot of other factors. There were other, Travis Kelce was still doing his thing. They had Isaiah Pacheco. They had Jet McKinnon. So even though Juju was doing well for them, he wasn't as dominant. So I'm holding on to him. This is why we have bench spots. So if I have a hole in my roster, if we're moving some of the guys down to IR spots, like I would rather just have Juju on the bench there, not starting him. But yeah, that would be my ad if you're going out there. And there's guys that we can get rid of. Like I got rid of Deontay Foreman this week. Was like a big, like, we're dropping Deontay Foreman. But I'm still holding the line with guys like Blake Corum, because for me, we haven't seen Blake Corum, but I don't think that's the detriment that everybody's making it out to be, because I just feel like Ronnie Rivers is the RB2 for the Rams, and they're confident with that. And if anything happens with Kyron Williams, then I think Blake Corum becomes the guy. So I'm still holding on to him, especially in leagues where I have Kyron Williams. I'll definitely not be getting rid of him. But I've got some deeper leagues where I've held on to him, and I know people have had questions about that, when to give up on that one.
Yeah.
Still holding the line with Blake Corum.
I want to talk about, obviously, the past 24 hours or so has been really Davante Adams this, Davante Adams that. He could be, traded away from the Raiders. Does that affect you starting Davante Adams this weekend? Does it affect you thinking maybe do we stick with him, try and get rid of him? What's the situation? What would you deal with it? How would you deal with it?
If the Raiders are still playing him, then I feel comfortable playing him. But if the Raiders know that they're moving on from him and don't want him to get injured, he's going to pop up on the injury report again, and they're not going to start him, and they're going to hold him out just like they did last week against the Cleveland Browns. So that's going to be the most telling to me. The true thing is, like, where is he going? And I know a lot of people have, made the connection going to the New York Jets to once again play with Aaron Rodgers, which to me would be the worst possible outcome. For somebody who has at least one of the two of Garrett Wilson or Breece Hall on their fantasy team, I would envision a situation where Davante Adams is there and Alan Lazard are taking all the targets. They're not going to those other guys. I know it probably won't happen, and I know the Jets wouldn't be this foolish. Like, send Garrett Wilson back, send him to the Raiders. If you're going to bring in Davante Adams, I know that won't happen. The one team that I would love to see him go to is the Washington Commanders. I think that would be a lot of fun. That would be good for the development of a quarterback. That was one of the issues that I had with Washington coming into the year, was if they had done enough to surround Jaden Daniels with enough talent, to the point of, like, don't draft a quarterback if you're not willing to make the investment around him, like the Texans did with C.J. Stroud, like the Bears have done with Caleb Williams. Because then you see what happens when you don't surround a quarterback with talent. It plagued Justin Fields in Chicago. Anthony Richardson, really, I think part of his struggles is that, the receivers aren't elite. So I think for the Commanders, it would be a pretty good idea to put Davante Adams out there and then maybe open up the other side of the field for them too. Like, if you look at the next gen passing charts, it's all to the right side. And so this would help open up the offense and give him a little bit more leeway to go out there and even increase what he's doing.
So you're sticking with Davante regardless, are you? You're not thinking let's try and trade him now, or we have a chance. Let's just see what happens.
We don't know what situation he's going into. Like, there's a lot of fun scenarios that people are putting out there, and it would be fun to see where he would go. I know nobody's talking. That probably wouldn't be the Rams, but it's funny too, because Denver and Kansas City, from a football, like, those would make the most sense. I just don't see the Raiders making either one of those moves.
Well, New Orleans is the other team that's been mentioned because the connection between Derek Carr and Davante Adams as well. So, that could be...
No, we don't want that one. No, because I think we talked about this last week. I went into every draft.
Chris Olave, is that what you said?
Having either Olave, Kamara, or having Rashid Shaheed. I have one of those three players on every single one of my teams. There is not a team that does not have at least one of those players.
I got a lot of questions all about one particular player. So, in fact, I'm just going to say the player's name. I'm not going to ask you a question. I'm just going to say the player's name. Tyreek Hill.
Tyreek Hill. Yeah, we touched on this a moment ago. Without knowing what's going to happen with Tua Tagovailoa at some point this season, it's hard to really decipher. Tua's never, to my knowledge, he's not on the IR, which means, like, he should be able to come back probably sooner than he probably should, if we're being completely honest. But at the same time, what are you selling Tyreek Hill for right now? Like, nobody wants him. Nobody would. If you put him on the waiver wire, I'm sure people would pick him up. But you're looking at that kind of the lowest value that he's ever had.
Are you considering even benching Tyreek Hill now?
You know what? If you're in a two receiver, like in a league where you start just two receivers, and you have some other opportunities to start some guys, I would consider it, depending on how good your wide receivers are. Like, if I'm looking at it right now, and forgive me if I'm pulling up some visual aids to kind of help me talk through this, where I have Tyreek Hill. Like, even from, for instance, because this, I'm looking at, like, realistic expectations. Like, if you have a team, let's say, like, your wide receiver one is CeeDee Lamb, Jamar, so you wouldn't have one of those guys. So you're looking at, like, if you had, like, I've seen one team where you had Justin Jefferson and Tyreek Hill, and then maybe you have somebody else. But if you got Malik Neighbors as your wide receiver 3, if you got Marvin Harrison Jr. as your wide receiver 3, I would even go with, like, Jaden Reed over him this week. Chris Godwin, I would start over him. Maybe Amari Cooper. So there were instances where I could see you possibly sitting Tyreek Hill. Not a lot of them, for instance, but there are some instances.
But he's not necessarily that automatic starter that we thought he would become.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
Like even Terry McLaurin, like I would start Terry McLaurin over him. Brian Thomas Jr. is getting close to this. Him and Christian Kirk.
Wow.
Last week we were talking about this. I'm so happy that both players played well because I was getting a lot of questions about, and I don't know why people do this where they have both of these wide receivers on their team where they're like, I've got Brian Thomas Jr. and Christian Kirk, and you're like, oh, I don't know. But obviously I would start DJ Moore in a revenge game over him this week. Brandon Ayuk is going to break out this week for the 49ers. He's been disappointing. George Pickens, even Deontay Johnson, I think you'll be able to move the ball. The Minnesota Vikings have given up a lot of production through the air, so I would trust Garrett Wilson this week. Drake London on Thursday night. Amari Cooper's got a great matchup. Like we're talking about guys we would have never fathomed starting in front of Tyreek Hill, weeks ago. I mean, Tyreek Hill might have been the first receiver off the board for a lot of people. As a matter of fact, I remember one league that we did in early, almost the end of July. Where my friend, she was picking at 5 or 6 as I was right behind her, and Tyreek Hill kept falling. And I'm like, hey, I go, just for my own mental headspace, like, is there any way that you'll pass on Tyreek Hill? And she's like, not a chance. I'm like, okay, so I'm going to pivot to Amon-Ra St. Brown, who I kind of wanted anyways. If you go back and look at the tapes, like I was a big Amon-Ra St. Brown guy. You know what's funny is I saw the line for Amon-Ra St. Brown, and I saw the 1-for-1, 7 yards and a touchdown, and I was late to watching the game because I coached my side, my U10 side, on Thursday nights, and back-to-back champs, by the way. And
nice.
I was sitting there and I was like, did he only has 1 reception for 7 yards? And I go, oh, that was his passing. Like,
well,
so ridiculous.
I don't blame you for that. I mean, that's not the one that comes straight to mind, is it? I think you'd be forgiven for that.
He threw that touchdown. He had a great
Even better.
game.
That's bonus
great
points.
Game. Yeah. So he's been fantastic. But yeah, Tyreek Hill, times are tough. So there are definitely, don't feel like you automatically have to start him. But let me go through
you feel like that with certain players though, don't you? Especially in the first round, it's almost like it takes a lot for you to feel like you can bench them because it feels like you've invested so much in them. I suppose it's like a real NFL team. Yeah,
it's a sunk cost situation too. But he always has the ability to make a big play. So I would just feel like I think most fantasy managers drafted Tyreek Hill and let's say Drake London on the way back, Chris Olave, Stephon Diggs, maybe Nico Collins, Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, one of those guys. That player elevates to your wide receiver 1. Tyreek is now a borderline wide receiver 2. But if you're talking about guys like Jackson Smith and Jigba, Rashid Shaheed, Cortland, I'm not starting those guys over him. Darnell Mooney, Jerry Jeudy, Wan'Dale Robinson. Like, I'm not getting that crazy with it, but some of those other guys, like he's the very end. He's the very end of the wide receivers, and I think it's an interesting conversation for people to have, and it's tough. Maybe you can flex them, but yeah, even then, if you have good running backs, you might not need them.
Okay, in the last few minutes, let's do some quick questions then. Let's do this. So this weekend, as I'm sure you're aware, the NFL returns to London. The Minnesota Vikings play the New York Jets. Now, there'll be lots of people, obviously, that will be going out to watch that game live in person. I'm very excited for it. What have we got? Oh, right, here we go. At Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, Adam.
It was painted red a couple of weeks ago, if I'm not mistaken.
It's always fun, isn't it? It's always fun to go to a game live and be rooting for specific players that you have in fantasy. Now, let's take away the likes of the big players on both of those teams. But are there any players that you think that maybe you might want to just sneak into your fantasy lineup just for a bit of fun, if nothing else?
You know what's funny is I got in trouble for this too because I was like, hey, like if you're not rooting for the Vikings or the Vikings and who are the Vikings playing? Why am I spacing on this? It's the Vikings
last week or the Jets or this week?
Vikings and Jets. Yeah. I was going to say Packers. I had Aaron Rodgers on the line.
Aaron Rodgers, yeah.
I'm like, if you're not rooting for one of those guys, like one of these teams, don't wear the kit. Because like every time that Arsenal comes to town, this year they hosted, I think it was not Brighton, but obviously they played Man United and whatever. I'm like, we don't see anybody nobody's walking around in a Bolton Wanderers kit. Maybe Vernon Kay, but that's about it. I did see somebody in a Fulham kit, but it was for ESR, so that makes sense. So Jordan Addison was a player who last week just seemingly not came out of nowhere, but played so exceptionally well. And I had to start him in an emergency spot, and I got completely lucky. Like, this is one, and I got lucky. I was like, I just can't trust Roma Dunze in this one, so I'm going to go with Jordan Addison coming back. But I think Jordan Addison's fun to play this week. Aaron Jones going up against Aaron Rodgers is always fun. I think that the Jets have done pretty well against running backs this year, but I still like him. Conklin is a nice player as well. I think that he's done some things. I want to see them move the ball through the air. I think that's why it kind of takes me away from Braylon Allen this week, because I do think that the Jets are going to have to attack them through the air. And why not go for it? Why not start Allen Lazard? Like, I'm looking at the Lazard king. I think that he's going to go out there and get some runs. So I like the two wide receiver twos in this contest, where you have Addison and you have Lazard.
Anthony Richardson may or may not play for the Indianapolis Colts, depending on injury this weekend against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Joe Flacco, should he be a consideration if he plays?
Absolutely. This is a great matchup for a quarterback. I would be all in on Joe Flacco if he's able to go and he gets the start. To me, it was a huge mistake for the Cleveland Browns to let him go. And now you're in a situation now in Indianapolis where you've got to look at the quarterback situation and say, you know what, they might be a little bit better off. Like, Anthony Richardson probably should have been one of those quarterbacks who's being developed, much like Michael Penix is down in Atlanta, much like Jordan Love was in Green Bay. He just didn't play enough football. And sometimes you got to, I understand the wanting to get him on the field, but sometimes you got to let players like that develop. One of the reasons why Jaden Daniels has played so well is that one of his college receivers was Brandon Ayuk. Like, that's how long he played college football. So he had a long time to develop. And I think for players like Anthony Richardson, who has been battling some injuries, over the course of his short NFL career, let Joe Flacco go out there and take care of this one. We saw him play last week. He played very well. They got the victory over the Pittsburgh Steelers, one of the top defenses in the NFL. And if Joe Flacco is playing, I've actually started him in a couple of spots because because of the quarterbacks on bye weeks, where I put in a huge bid for Joe Flacco in a dynasty league. Almost used all of my fab because I had Herbo as my only quarterback. And now I'm like, I played in a dynasty league where I went against Tom Brady this week. The guy had no quarterback. There was no quarterbacks to pick up at all because it's a super flex. And as a joke, he just picked up Tom Brady to be like, well, if I'm going to lose, I might as well lose with Tom Brady.
For a second there, I thought you said that you were in a dynasty league and you played Tom Brady.
No, I played against him. My opponent played him just as a joke.
I know. I thought your opponent was Tom Brady for a second. I was about to be like, oh, wow. I mean,
that would have been a cooler story.
Let's go in on this a little bit.
I wish.
Okay, a couple more really quickly from Andy. Gabe Davis or Antonio Gibson in the flex?
Yeah, Gibby actually showed some signs of life right there. And Gabe Davis, much like in Buffalo, he's a pop player. But I think that the Jags have really focused in on Christian Kirk and Brian Thomas Jr. Brian Thomas Jr., by the way, this was one thing when I wrote in my preseason piece of the NFL draft, is I don't write a predictions piece. I write a who you should draft piece. I said that the Jets needed to take Brian Thomas Jr. They didn't listen. And he's out there killing it for the Jags. So I don't like Gabe Davis as much, but I'm encouraged by what we saw last week with the usage of Antonio Gibson. Great matchup for the running backs this week for the New England Patriots. So I actually like Gibby in this one.
And the last one, I suppose, is more, I don't know if this is an existential question or whatever. You're 0-4. How do you stay motivated?
Yeah, well, you just need one. This isn't the Premier League. There are actual playoffs that you are building for. By the way, I love the Premier League for that. I think playoffs are fraudulent. You reward a team that's hot at the end of the season. You're not giving benefit to the team that's got sustained greatness over 49 games or whatever it is. So for me, 38 games. Sorry, I'm getting it all confused.
Come on now.
I'm sorry. It took me a second. I'm not good. I should be better at math. My thing is, if you're 0-4, you just need to win this week. That's all that matters. Don't think about week 12. Don't think about the playoffs. Just win this week. And after you win this week, then you worry about the next one. You can't get 2 until you get 1. Shake it off. Go out there, win the week, and then we'll regroup and we'll do it again in 7 days from now.
Spoken like a true coach of an under-10s soccer. So is it back-to-back winning, did you say, soccer?
We are, yeah.
Soccer
That's
team?
that was from the first. Oh, you can't see that one, but yeah, that's we're back-to-back champs. We're 4-0 to start this season. By the way, if anybody has any ideas, because it's U10, the opponent that we're playing is actually out scouting us. Like they're at our practice. Like why are they watching?
Oh wow!
And our best player is not going to be playing this weekend, which is a little bit of a disappointment. But she's got to go down to San Diego to go see the Imagine Dragons with her family. And I'm like,
I mean, priorities.
This is what happens. Like
priorities.
it's not Declan Rice accidentally kicking a ball away, but it's the Imagine Dragons.
It's about to damn Imagine Dragons. Adam Rank, thank you very much for joining us today on the Fantasy Clinic. Have a good week, and I hope that you and your 20 fantasy leagues or however many it is, you manage to get, I don't know, at least 14 victories, something like that.
I hope so. Yeah. You know what? Last week we talked about this, about how, there's some that are, you know what? The league where we talked about this last week. The league where I played, Jordan Addison was one of the ones where Fantasy Plus picked my league. And I went back and looked. That's what happened. Okay. Because I was like, I almost put Roma Dunze in. And I'm like, nah, I have so much exposure to Roma Dunze. I'll do that. I think I went 18-2, except the two leagues that I talked about as my most favorite, I lost both of those.
Those ones that you spent the most attention on.
I jinxed it. I jinxed it last week.
Livid. Adam, thank you so much for joining us.
Good seeing you again.
Yeah,
no
you
disrespect to Will, but it's been an absolute pleasure seeing you again.
Oh, I have so much disrespect for Will, so it's fine.